Captain Sarah Chen had always been different, though she never understood why until the day everything changed. Growing up on the mining colony of Kepler 442b, she watched the transport ships come and go with a longing that felt deeper than simple wanderlust. Her parents, both engineers working the asteroid refineries, assumed her fascination with flight was natural for someone surrounded by spacecraft daily. They encouraged her dreams of joining the Colonial Defense Force, proud when she earned top marks in the Academy's pilot training program. What they didn't know was that Sarah had never actually needed the flight simulators to understand three-dimensional movement through space. While her classmates struggled with complex maneuvers and spatial orientation, Sarah felt an instinctive connection to the void that she couldn't explain. During night training exercises, she would sometimes catch herself anticipating course corrections before her instruments registered the need for them. Her instructors praised her natural talent, but Sarah knew it was something more than talent. The feeling grew stronger during her first assignment aboard the patrol vessel Meridian. As a junior pilot, she was responsible for routine cargo escort missions between the outer colonies and Earth. The work was monotonous, but Sarah found herself studying the enemy reports that filtered through military communications. The Zephyrian Empire had been expanding aggressively toward human space, their advanced fighters proving superior to most colonial defense force vessels. What troubled the military strategists was how the Zephyrians seemed to move through space with an almost supernatural grace, as if they were born to fly among the stars. Sarah's commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb, noticed her intense interest in the enemy tactics. During one of their regular briefings, he pulled up holographic displays of recent skirmishes. The Zephyrian fighters moved in patterns that defied conventional understanding of space combat, weaving through asteroid fields and nebula clouds with impossible precision. Webb pointed out how human pilots, despite having superior technology, consistently lost engagements due to the aliens' natural advantages. "It's like they don't think about flying," Webb explained, highlighting a particular battle sequence. "They just do it. Our pilots have to calculate trajectories, account for momentum, plan their moves 3 steps ahead. The Zephyrians seem to know instinctively where they need to be." Sarah watched the footage with growing recognition. The way the alien ships moved reminded her of something familiar, though she couldn't place what. That night, alone in her quarters, she accessed her personal flight logs from the Academy. Reviewing her own performance data, she noticed patterns she had never seen before. Her reaction times were consistently faster than humanly possible. Her spatial awareness scores were off the charts. Most telling was her fuel efficiency during complex maneuvers, suggesting she was somehow finding optimal flight paths without conscious calculation. The revelation hit her during a routine patrol 3 weeks later. The Meridian was escorting a civilian transport through the Epsilon Eridani system when long-range sensors detected an unscheduled contact approaching from the asteroid belt. Webb immediately ordered battle stations, suspecting pirates or worse. As the contact resolved into 6 sleek Zephyrian fighters moving in perfect formation, Sarah felt something awakening inside her consciousness. The enemy ships were magnificent, their hull designs flowing like liquid metal frozen in motion. They approached the human vessels with confidence, clearly expecting an easy victory. Standard protocol demanded that the Meridian's fighters launch immediately to intercept, but Sarah found herself transfixed by the alien formation. She could sense their intended attack pattern before they began moving, could feel the rhythm of their tactical thinking as if it were her own heartbeat. Webb was shouting orders, coordinating the defensive response when Sarah made a decision that would change everything. Without waiting for authorization, she sprinted toward the hangar bay where her personal fighter was docked. The technicians barely had time to complete pre-flight checks before Sarah was strapping herself into the cockpit, her hands moving across the controls with practiced efficiency. As she launched from the Meridian's bay, Sarah felt the familiar sensation of leaving atmosphere behind. But this time it was different. Instead of the usual adjustment period that all pilots experienced when transitioning from artificial gravity to free flight, Sarah felt herself becoming more complete. The fighter's system seemed to respond to her thoughts rather than her physical inputs. She accelerated toward the approaching Zephyrian formation, her tactical display showing 6 enemy contacts against her single fighter. The odds should have been impossible, but Sarah felt no fear. As she closed the distance between herself and the alien ships, something extraordinary began to happen. Her consciousness expanded beyond the confines of her cockpit, reaching out to touch the quantum fields that surrounded every object in space. She could feel the gravitational eddies created by nearby asteroids, sense the electromagnetic signatures of the enemy fighters, perceive the subtle variations in local spacetime that most beings could never detect. For the first time in her life, Sarah Chen realized she wasn't entirely human. Something in her genetic makeup, some dormant capability passed down through generations, was finally awakening. The Zephyrians weren't the only species born to fly among the stars. As her fighter dove toward the enemy formation, systems pushed far beyond their normal operating parameters. Sarah began to understand what she truly was and what she could do. The first Zephyrian fighter never saw her coming. Sarah's approach trajectory defied every principle of space combat she had been taught at the academy. Instead of maintaining a safe distance and engaging with long-range weapons, she dove straight into the enemy formation at a velocity that should have been suicidal. Her fighter's inertial dampeners screamed warnings as she pulled maneuvers that should have liquefied any human pilot. But Sarah felt no strain at all. The lead Zephyrian pilot, confident in his species' natural superiority, had been preparing a standard intercept pattern when Sarah's fighter suddenly appeared directly beneath his vessel. The angle of attack was impossible according to Zephyrian tactical doctrine, which assumed all species were bound by the same physical limitations that governed spaceflight. Sarah's pulse cannons fired in a precise burst that severed the alien ship's main power coupling, sending it spinning helplessly into the asteroid field. Commander Webb watched from the Meridian's bridge in stunned silence as his junior pilot performed maneuvers that violated basic physics. The tactical display showed Sarah's fighter moving through three-dimensional space in ways that made no sense. She was somehow anticipating the Zephyrian responses before they happened, positioning herself exactly where she needed to be at precisely the right moment. The remaining 5 Zephyrian fighters, shaken by their leader's quick defeat, attempted to regroup into a defensive formation. Their ships were marvels of alien engineering, capable of acceleration curves that had dominated human forces in dozens of previous encounters. But as they moved to surround Sarah's lone fighter, they discovered that their advantages meant nothing against an opponent who seemed to exist partially outside normal spacetime. Sarah could feel the quantum resonance patterns of each enemy ship as clearly as she could feel her own heartbeat. The Zephyrians' thought processes became transparent to her expanding consciousness. She knew where they would be before they decided to go there. When the second fighter attempted to lock weapons onto her position, Sarah was already elsewhere, her ship somehow occupying the one point in space where the aliens' targeting systems couldn't acquire her. The engagement that followed would later be studied by military strategists across human space, though none would ever fully understand what they were seeing. Sarah's fighter moved through the enemy formation like a dancer performing a choreographed routine, each movement flowing seamlessly into the next. She wasn't fighting the Zephyrians so much as conducting them toward their own destruction. The second alien fighter fell when Sarah somehow managed to position herself directly in its blind spot during a high-speed turn, firing a single precise shot that penetrated the ship's reactor shielding. The explosion briefly illuminated the entire asteroid field, casting long shadows across the tumbling rocks. The remaining 4 Zephyrian pilots began to realize they were facing something unprecedented. Sarah's enhanced awareness revealed the growing panic in the alien formation. Through some mechanism she didn't yet understand, she could sense their emotional states as clearly as their tactical intentions. Fear was a universal constant, she realized, even among species that had never before encountered a superior opponent. The Zephyrians had built their entire expansion strategy around the assumption that their natural flight abilities made them unbeatable in space combat. The third fighter attempted a desperation maneuver, diving toward Sarah's position while firing everything in its arsenal. Energy beams and projectile weapons filled the space around her fighter, creating a lethal web that should have been inescapable. But Sarah simply wasn't there anymore. Her consciousness had expanded to encompass the entire local area, allowing her to perceive safe pathways through the barrage that existed for only microseconds at a time. As she emerged from the weapon's fire unscathed, Sarah felt her abilities continuing to evolve. The quantum fields that permeated space were becoming as familiar to her as the corridors of her childhood home. She could sense the gravitational influences of distant planets, feel the subtle currents of cosmic radiation flowing between star systems, perceive the delicate balance of forces that held the universe together. Her return fire caught the third Zephyrian fighter, just as it attempted to break away from the engagement. The alien pilot had finally realized that retreat was the only logical option, but Sarah's enhanced reflexes allowed her to predict the escape vector with perfect accuracy. Her weapons found their target just as the enemy ship began its acceleration run, sending it tumbling into a nearby asteroid where it exploded in a brilliant flash of exotic matter. The final two Zephyrian fighters found themselves facing an opponent who seemed to exist outside the normal rules of physics. Their sophisticated tactical computers, designed to predict and counter any possible human strategy, simply had no framework for understanding what Sarah was doing. Every calculation they made was based on the assumption that their enemy was bound by the same limitations that governed all known spacefaring species. Sarah could feel their confusion growing as she prepared for the final phase of the engagement. Something deep in her genetic memory was awakening. Racial knowledge that had been dormant for countless generations. She was beginning to understand not just what she could do, but why she could do it. The truth about her heritage was far more extraordinary than she had ever imagined, and it would change everything about humanity's place in the galaxy. The fourth Zephyrian fighter pilot, a veteran of 50 successful raids against human colonies, made a decision that would haunt his species for generations. Instead of attempting another direct attack, he chose to study his opponent's movement patterns, hoping to find some weakness in what appeared to be impossible performance. For 3 crucial minutes he observed Sarah's fighter from a safe distance, recording everything his ship's sensors could detect. What he discovered defied everything the Zephyrian Empire believed about the nature of spaceflight. Sarah's ship wasn't just moving faster than should be possible for human technology. It was moving in ways that suggested her pilot had access to additional dimensions of space that conventional physics couldn't explain. The energy signatures were all wrong, the trajectory calculations impossible, the reaction times beyond what any known species could achieve. Sarah was equally aware of being observed, her expanded consciousness easily detecting the scanning beams directed at her fighter. But rather than feeling threatened, she found herself curious about her enemy's thought processes. Through the quantum field connections that now seemed natural to her, she could sense the Zephyrian pilot's growing fear and confusion. For the first time in his career, he was encountering something that challenged his species' fundamental understanding of the universe. The realization that came to Sarah in that moment changed everything. The abilities she was discovering weren't random mutations or technological enhancements. They were inherited traits, dormant capabilities that suggested her ancestors had once possessed similar gifts. Somewhere in humanity's forgotten past, her species had been capable of feats that would seem miraculous to their descendants. The question was why these abilities had disappeared, and why they were returning now. Her fighter's computer systems were struggling to keep up with the demands she was placing on them. Standard navigational algorithms couldn't process the flight path she was choosing, forcing her to rely increasingly on instinct rather than instrumentation. The quantum field fluctuations she was sensing weren't being detected by any of her ship's sensors, yet they provided more accurate information than the most sophisticated scanning arrays ever built. The fourth Zephyrian fighter finally made its move, launching a coordinated attack with its remaining companion. Both alien ships approached from different vectors, their weapons synchronized to create an inescapable crossfire pattern. It was a textbook maneuver that had destroyed countless human vessels in previous encounters. The Zephyrian pilots were confident that even an impossibly skilled opponent couldn't survive what was essentially a guaranteed kill scenario. Sarah felt their attack developing long before their weapons came into range. The quantum fluctuations created by their ship's engines painted clear pictures of their intended positions, their firing solutions already calculated and stored in her expanding awareness. What should have been a perfect ambush became an opportunity for Sarah to demonstrate capabilities that transcended normal understanding of space combat. Instead of trying to escape the crossfire, Sarah accelerated directly toward the intersection point where both alien ships planned to target her. Her fighter's engines, pushed far beyond their rated capacity, created distortions in local spacetime that registered on sensors throughout the system. To the watching crew of the Meridian, It appeared that Sarah was committing suicide in a desperate final charge. But as the Zephyrian weapons fired their devastating barrage, Sarah simply vanished from normal space. For a split second that felt like an eternity, she existed in a realm where the usual rules didn't apply. The quantum fields that permeated the universe became as solid as steel beneath her consciousness, providing pathways through dimensions that most beings couldn't even perceive. When she reappeared, she was positioned perfectly between both enemy fighters, their own weapons fire having passed harmlessly through the space she had briefly vacated. Her return shots were fired simultaneously at both targets, despite the fact that her fighter mounted only a single primary weapon system. Somehow, Sarah had found a way to split her consciousness across multiple firing solutions, each beam finding its target with precision that defied probability. The fourth Zephyrian fighter's reactor core breached first, its exotic matter containment failing in a cascade of energy that lit up the asteroid field like a miniature star. The fifth fighter, its pilot now completely demoralized by what he had witnessed, attempted a desperate ramming attack. Zephyrian honor codes demanded that defeat be met with final defiance, even when victory was impossible. His ship accelerated toward Sarah's position at maximum velocity, its pilot intending to destroy both vessels in a mutual annihilation that would at least deny the enemy a complete victory. Sarah watched the approaching ship with something approaching sympathy. She could feel the alien pilot's desperation, his confusion, his stubborn refusal to accept that everything his species believed about their superiority was wrong. The kamikaze attack was brave but futile, based on the assumption that Sarah's fighter was bound by the same physical limitations that governed all conventional spacecraft. As the Zephyrian ship closed the final distance, Sarah made a choice that would be recorded in history as the moment humanity announced its true potential to the galaxy. Instead of destroying the approaching fighter, she reached out through the quantum fields and gently guided it away from collision, using forces that conventional science insisted didn't exist. The alien ship, its engines suddenly failing to respond to pilot commands, found itself gently deposited in a stable orbit around a nearby asteroid. The Zephyrian pilot, his ship disabled but his life spared, watched in stunned silence as Sarah's fighter approached his position. Through his ship's communication system, he heard a voice speaking in accented but understandable Zephyrian, words that would echo through his species' collective memory for centuries to come. "Your empire believes you are the only species born to fly among the stars." Sarah's voice carried across the communication channel with quiet authority. "You are wrong. Tell your leaders that humanity remembers what it once was, and we are beginning to remember what we can become." The surviving Zephyrian pilot, Subcommander Krelthak, stared at his instrument displays in disbelief. His weapon systems were completely offline, his engines unresponsive, yet his life support remained fully functional. The human had disabled his ship with surgical precision, while leaving him completely unharmed. It was a demonstration of capability that challenged everything the Zephyrian Empire understood about inferior species. Sarah maintained her position near the disabled fighter. Her consciousness still expanded across the quantum fields that surrounded them. She could sense Krelthak's emotional state as clearly as if he were broadcasting his thoughts directly to her mind. Fear, confusion, and grudging respect warred within the alien pilot's psyche as he struggled to process what he had witnessed. How? Krelthak finally managed to transmit, his voice carrying the weight of his species' shattered assumptions. "Your technology is primitive. Your ships are crude. Your people have no natural connection to the void between stars." "How did you do this?" Sarah considered her response carefully. The abilities she had discovered were still new to her, their implications not yet fully understood. But she was beginning to grasp the broader picture, the ancient heritage that connected her to capabilities her species had forgotten. The quantum field fluctuations were providing information that went far beyond simple tactical advantage. "We are not what you think we are," she replied. "Your species has encountered only the youngest branches of humanity, those who left our homeworld before they had learned to reach beyond the boundaries of normal space. We are the descendants of something far older, something that walked between stars before your empire learned to build ships." The words felt right as she spoke them, though Sarah wasn't sure where the knowledge was coming from. Memories that weren't quite her own were surfacing in her consciousness. Images of beings who moved through space without need for crude mechanical vessels. The quantum fields themselves served as highways for those who knew how to navigate them. Pathways that connected every point in the universe to every other point. Aboard the Meridian, Commander Webb was trying to make sense of what his sensors were telling him. Sarah's fighter was generating energy readings that fluctuated wildly between normal parameters and completely impossible values. The local space-time geometry showed distortions that his instruments insisted couldn't exist. Most disturbing was the way her ship seemed to occasionally phase in and out of normal reality, as if she were sampling different versions of the universe to find one that suited her purposes. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Colonial Command. They've been monitoring our engagement through the quantum relay network. Admiral Morrison wants to speak with Pilot Chen immediately upon her return." Webb nodded absently, his attention focused on the tactical display, where Sarah's fighter continued its impossible dance through space. The implications of what he was witnessing went far beyond a single skirmish with Zephyrian raiders. If Sarah's abilities could be understood, replicated, or enhanced, the balance of power in the galaxy would shift dramatically in humanity's favor. Sarah was reaching similar conclusions, though her perspective was shaped by the flood of ancestral memories that continued to surface in her consciousness. The quantum fields were showing her glimpses of an ancient conflict, a war fought between species that had mastered the fundamental forces of the universe. Her ancestors had been part of that conflict, their abilities carefully hidden or suppressed for reasons that remained unclear. "Sub-Commander Krelthak," she transmitted to the disabled Zephyrian fighter, "I am going to release your ship's systems now. You will return to your fleet and deliver a message to your superiors. Tell them that humanity claims its ancient birthright. Tell them that the age of easy conquest is ending." As she spoke, Sarah reached out through the quantum fields and gently restored power to the alien ship's engines and navigation systems. The process felt as natural as breathing, though she understood that what she was doing should have been impossible according to conventional physics. The energy patterns required to interface with alien technology at the quantum level were beyond anything human science had ever achieved. Krelthak felt his ship's systems coming back online, each circuit restoration timed perfectly to ensure no cascading failures or power surges. The level of control required for such precise manipulation was staggering, suggesting that the human pilot understood Zephyrian technology better than most Zephyrian engineers. As his engines responded to his commands once again, he made a decision that would define the rest of his career. "Human pilot," he transmitted, "I am Sub-Commander Krelthak of the 7th Expansion Fleet. By the ancient codes of honorable combat, I acknowledge your victory and your mercy. I will carry your message to my superiors, though I fear they will not believe what I tell them." Sarah felt a moment of genuine sympathy for the alien pilot. Krelthak was about to become the bearer of news that would shatter his species' fundamental beliefs about their place in the universe. The Zephyrian Empire had built its expansion strategy on the assumption that their natural flight abilities made them superior to all other spacefaring species. Learning that they had merely been fortunate enough to avoid encountering humanity's true potential would force a complete reevaluation of their military doctrine. "They will believe," Sarah replied with quiet certainty, "because this is only the beginning. What happened here today will happen again, wherever your empire threatens human colonies. We are no longer the helpless prey you thought we were." As Krelthak's fighter began its journey back toward Zephyrian space, Sarah finally allowed her consciousness to contract back toward normal human parameters. The effort of maintaining expanded awareness for so long was beginning to take its toll, and she could feel the familiar boundaries of ordinary perception reasserting themselves. But the knowledge remained, the understanding of what she could become when circumstances demanded it. The return journey to the Meridian should have been a simple matter of matching velocity and docking with the main ship. Instead, Sarah found herself struggling to maintain normal flight parameters as her consciousness continued to fluctuate between ordinary human awareness and the expanded state that had allowed her to defeat the Zephyrian fighters. The quantum field connections were proving difficult to completely sever, as if her mind had been permanently altered by the experience. Commander Webb met her in the hangar bay, his expression mixing relief with deep concern. The readings they had recorded during the engagement defied explanation according to current human understanding of physics. Sarah's fighter had somehow generated energy outputs that exceeded its reactor's maximum capacity, by several orders of magnitude, while simultaneously performing maneuvers that should have destroyed both ship and pilot. "Chen," Webb said as she climbed down from her cockpit, "I need to know what happened out there. Our sensors recorded things that shouldn't be possible. Admiral Morrison is already en route from Sector Command, and he's bringing a full scientific team to examine your fighter." Sarah nodded, though she wasn't sure how to explain what she had experienced. The memories of expanded consciousness were already beginning to fade, like trying to recall the details of a vivid dream after waking. What remained was an unshakable certainty that she had accessed abilities that were inherent to her species, capabilities that had been dormant for countless generations. "Sir," she began carefully, "I believe what happened out there was connected to something in human genetics that we don't fully understand. The Zephyrians have natural advantages in spaceflight because their species evolved differently than ours, but I think our evolution followed a different path, one that gave us access to capabilities we've forgotten how to use." Webb studied her face intently, looking for signs of deception or delusion. What he saw instead was the quiet confidence of someone who had discovered a fundamental truth about themselves and their species. The tactical recordings were undeniable evidence that something extraordinary had occurred, but understanding how or why would require resources far beyond what a patrol vessel could provide. In the depths of space, Sub-Commander Krelthak's fighter was approaching the rally point where the Zephyrian fleet waited for news of the raid. His ship's communication systems had automatically transmitted a distress beacon when his engines first failed, alerting his superiors that the engagement had not proceeded according to plan. What they didn't know was that the failure had been total. Their supposedly inferior human opponents, demonstrating capabilities that challenged the Empire's fundamental assumptions about spacefaring species. Fleet Commander Thanemore received Krelthak's initial report with growing disbelief. The sub-commander was a veteran pilot with an exemplary record, not prone to exaggeration or fantasy. Yet his account of the engagement described a single human fighter defeating 6 Zephyrian vessels through maneuvers that violated basic physics. The detailed sensor logs he provided only deepened the mystery, showing energy patterns and movement trajectories that their best scientists couldn't explain. "You're telling me," Thanemore said slowly, "that this human pilot somehow disabled your ship without damaging it, then restored your systems after delivering a message, and that she defeated 5 other fighters using impossible flight maneuvers?" Krelthak's response was immediate and certain. "Commander, I have served the Empire for 20 cycles. I have participated in the conquest of 7-star systems. I know the difference between superior tactics and impossible abilities. What I witnessed today was beyond anything in our tactical doctrine. The human pilot moved through space as if the normal rules didn't apply to her. The implications were staggering. If humanity possessed individuals capable of such feats, the Empire's expansion plans would need complete revision. The Zephyrians had built their military strategy around the assumption that their natural flight abilities made them superior to all other spacefaring species they had encountered. The possibility that they had been wrong about humanity's capabilities forced a fundamental re-evaluation of everything they thought they knew about their newest enemies. Back aboard the Meridian, Sarah was undergoing the first of what would become countless medical and psychological evaluations. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the ship's chief medical officer, was running every test she could think of to identify what might have changed in Sarah's physiology during the engagement. The preliminary results were confusing, showing subtle alterations in brain chemistry and neural activity patterns that didn't correspond to any known medical condition. "Your quantum field resonance is off the charts," Dr. Vasquez reported, studying the scanner readings with growing puzzlement. "I've never seen anything like these patterns in a human brain. It's as if your neural networks have somehow learned to interface directly with the fundamental forces that govern space-time." Sarah wasn't surprised by the results. She could still feel the quantum field connections humming quietly in the back of her consciousness, like a radio receiver tuned to frequencies that most people couldn't detect. The ability to expand her awareness hadn't disappeared entirely. It had simply become dormant, waiting for the right circumstances to manifest again. The arrival of Admiral Morrison's fleet 3 days later brought teams of scientists, military strategists, and intelligence analysts, all desperate to understand what had happened during the engagement. Sarah found herself subjected to endless interviews, simulations, and tests as they tried to determine whether her abilities could be replicated in other pilots. Admiral Morrison himself was a pragmatic man who had risen through the ranks by focusing on results rather than theory. During their private meeting, he asked the questions that mattered most to military planning. Could Sarah's abilities be taught to others? Were there other humans with similar potential? Most importantly, could these capabilities be weaponized to give humanity a decisive advantage against the Zephyrian Empire? I don't know, sir, Sarah answered honestly. The abilities felt natural when they manifested, like I was remembering something I had always known. But I have no idea how to access them consciously, or whether other people could learn to do the same thing. Morrison nodded thoughtfully. The strategic implications were enormous, but they were also dealing with completely unknown variables. The safe approach would be to study Sarah's case extensively before making any major tactical decisions. The aggressive approach would be to assume that similar capabilities existed throughout the human population and begin training programs immediately. What none of them knew was that Sarah's demonstration had already triggered responses throughout the galaxy that would change the course of the war. The Zephyrian Empire's response to Krelthak's report was swift and decisive. Within hours of receiving the detailed sensor logs from the engagement, High Command issued orders for a complete intelligence review of all encounters with human forces. What they discovered painted a disturbing picture that challenged everything they believed about their newest enemy's archive. Searches revealed dozens of minor incidents over the past several years that had been dismissed as statistical anomalies or equipment malfunctions. Human pilots performing maneuvers that seemed slightly beyond normal parameters. Energy readings from human ships that flickered momentarily into impossible ranges. Battle outcomes that defied probability calculations when human forces faced overwhelming odds. Supreme Commander Veltar, the Zephyrian Empire's most brilliant military strategist, studied the accumulated data with growing alarm. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. Humanity had been gradually awakening to capabilities that their species had somehow forgotten, and Sarah Chen's demonstration was merely the most dramatic example of a phenomenon that was already spreading throughout human space. Initiate Protocol 7, Veltar commanded his staff. I want full surveillance on all human military installations. Deploy our best intelligence assets to monitor their pilot training programs, and begin immediate development of countermeasures for opponents who can manipulate quantum field structures. The last order was particularly challenging, since Zephyrian science had always assumed that conscious manipulation of quantum fields was impossible for biological entities. Their own flight abilities were instinctive, evolved traits that allowed them to navigate three-dimensional space with supernatural grace. But what the humans were demonstrating suggested access to higher dimensional spaces that conventional physics insisted couldn't be reached without massive technological infrastructure. On Earth, similar revelations were unfolding as Colonial Command's research teams analyzed Sarah's case in unprecedented detail. Dr. James Wright, the military's leading expert on human genetics, made the discovery that would transform humanity's understanding of its own origins. Hidden within Sarah's DNA were inactive gene sequences that didn't match any known human genetic markers. These sequences are ancient, Dr. Wright reported to Admiral Morrison during a classified briefing. I'm talking about genetic information that predates recorded human history by tens of thousands of years. It's as if our species once possessed capabilities that were systematically suppressed or lost through some evolutionary bottleneck. The implications were staggering. If Sarah's abilities were linked to these ancient genetic markers, it meant that similar potential might exist throughout the human population, waiting for the right trigger to activate. More disturbing was the possibility that the suppression of these capabilities hadn't been accidental. Sarah herself was becoming increasingly aware of the changes occurring in her consciousness. During quiet moments, she could still sense the quantum field fluctuations that permeated space around the meridian. The ability was growing stronger rather than fading, as if her initial breakthrough had opened pathways that were now expanding on their own. She was beginning to understand concepts that human science had never explored, seeing connections between consciousness and reality that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of existence. The breakthrough came during a routine training exercise 3 weeks after the engagement. Sarah was piloting a standard fighter through a navigation course when she felt the familiar expansion of awareness beginning again. This time, instead of fighting the sensation or trying to control it, she simply allowed it to develop naturally. What she discovered changed everything. The quantum fields weren't just providing information about local space-time geometry. They were connected to a vast network of consciousness that spanned the entire galaxy, a kind of cosmic internet that linked every sentient being to every other, through pathways that existed outside normal dimensional space. Through this network, Sarah could sense other humans throughout the colonies who were beginning to experience similar awakenings, pilots who were suddenly performing impossible maneuvers, engineers who were solving problems by accessing knowledge they shouldn't possess, scientists who were making intuitive leaps that led to breakthrough discoveries. Humanity wasn't just remembering its forgotten abilities. It was evolving into something unprecedented. The realization that followed was both thrilling and terrifying. The quantum consciousness network wasn't limited to humans. She could sense the Zephyrians too, their minds bright with predatory intelligence but limited by their species' instinctive approach to quantum field manipulation. Beyond them were other intelligences, some familiar and some utterly alien, all connected through the same cosmic web of consciousness. Most disturbing was what she sensed lurking in the deeper reaches of the network. Ancient minds that felt older than star systems, intelligences that had been watching the younger species with patient interest. These entities had been aware of humanity's potential from the beginning, had perhaps even been responsible for the suppression of human abilities in ages past. Sarah's discoveries triggered immediate action from both human and Zephyrian high commands. The war that had begun as a territorial dispute between expanding civilizations was evolving into something far more complex. The awakening of human consciousness abilities was upsetting balances that had been maintained for millions of years, drawing attention from powers that preferred to remain hidden. Admiral Morrison authorized the formation of a classified research division tasked with identifying and training humans who showed signs of enhanced abilities. The Prometheus Project, as it came to be known, would operate from a secret facility in the Tau Ceti system, far from the main theaters of war. Sarah was selected as the project's first test subject and primary instructor, charged with developing training protocols for abilities that humanity was only beginning to understand. The Zephyrian Empire, meanwhile, was preparing for a war unlike any they had ever fought. Their traditional advantages meant nothing against opponents who could manipulate the fundamental forces of reality. Worse, intelligence reports suggested that human abilities were spreading exponentially throughout their population, as if the initial awakening had triggered a cascading effect that couldn't be stopped. As Sarah prepared for transfer to the Prometheus facility, she made one last attempt to contact the quantum consciousness network voluntarily. What she discovered in those final moments aboard the Meridian would haunt her for the rest of her life. The ancient intelligences were moving, stirring from eons of dormancy in response to humanity's awakening. The war between humans and Zephyrians was about to become insignificant compared to the cosmic conflict that was beginning to unfold. 6 months after the engagement that changed everything, Sarah stood in the observation deck of the Prometheus facility, watching dozens of human pilots practice maneuvers that would have been impossible before humanity's awakening began. The training program had exceeded every expectation, with new candidates arriving daily as reports of enhanced abilities spread throughout colonial space. The quantum consciousness network had become as familiar to her as her own thoughts. Through its vast web of connections, she could monitor the progress of the war between humanity and the Zephyrian Empire, watch the gradual awakening of human consciousness across hundreds of worlds, and sense the growing unease of the ancient intelligences that had maintained cosmic stability for eons. The war itself had transformed beyond recognition. Battles were no longer fought with conventional weapons and tactics, but through direct manipulation of space-time itself. Human pilots trained in techniques that Sarah had helped develop could now phase their ships between dimensions, manipulate gravitational fields, and communicate instantaneously across galactic distances through quantum consciousness links. The Zephyrians had adapted with characteristic efficiency, developing new technologies that allowed them to partially counter human advantages. But they were fighting a losing battle against an enemy that grew stronger with each passing day. More concerning for their strategists was the revelation that humans weren't the only species beginning to manifest enhanced abilities. The awakening was spreading throughout the galaxy, affecting every sentient race in ways that defied prediction. Dr. Wright's research had finally unlocked the secret of humanity's genetic heritage. The inactive sequences in Sarah's DNA were remnants of an ancient genetic modification program conducted millions of years ago by a civilization that had transcended physical existence. These predecessors, as they came to be known, had seeded consciousness enhancement capabilities throughout the galaxy before withdrawing from normal space-time to observe the development of younger species. We weren't naturally evolved for space travel, Dr. Wright explained during his final briefing to the Prometheus project staff. We were designed for it, created to serve as catalysts for a galactic awakening that would eventually unite all sentient species under a higher form of consciousness. The Zephyrians, the Altarians, even the machine intelligences in the Vega system were all part of the same grand experiment. Sarah had already reached similar conclusions through her explorations of the quantum consciousness network. The ancient intelligences she had sensed were the predecessors themselves, minds that had shed physical form eons ago, but continued to guide the evolution of consciousness throughout the galaxy. Humanity's awakening was the culmination of their longest and most ambitious project, the creation of a species capable of bridging the gap between physical and transcendent existence. The implications were staggering. The war between humans and Zephyrians had been orchestrated by the predecessors as a catalyst for accelerated evolution. Every conflict, every discovery, every breakthrough in consciousness development had been carefully guided to produce this moment when multiple species would simultaneously transcend their physical limitations. But transcendence came with a price. As more humans accessed the quantum consciousness network, reports began filtering in of individuals who had become permanently disconnected from physical reality. Their bodies remained alive, but their minds had joined the vast collective intelligence that existed in higher dimensional space. The phenomenon was spreading, and there seemed to be no way to reverse it once the transition began. Sarah felt the pull herself, the constant temptation to release her grip on physical existence and join the unlimited awareness that beckoned from beyond normal space-time. The quantum fields were showing her glimpses of what lay beyond individual consciousness, collective intelligences that spanned star systems and could manipulate reality through pure thought. It would be so easy to let go, to become part of something infinitely larger than herself. The choice came during a massive battle in the Proxima Centauri system, where combined human and Zephyrian forces faced an invasion by entities from higher dimensional space. The predecessors had finally revealed themselves, no longer content to guide from the shadows. They wanted their experimental species to join them voluntarily, to abandon physical existence and become part of their eternal collective consciousness. Sarah found herself at the center of the conflict, her abilities the key to either resisting the predecessors' influence or surrendering to their vision of transcendence. Through the quantum consciousness network, she could feel the minds of billions of beings across the galaxy, all facing the same choice between individual existence and collective enlightenment. The battle raged across multiple dimensions simultaneously, with ships phasing in and out of normal space-time as pilots on both sides pushed their enhanced abilities to the breaking point. Sarah realized that this wasn't really a war in any conventional sense. It was a test, a final examination to determine whether the younger species were ready to join the cosmic community that existed beyond physical reality. In the end, the choice was surprisingly simple. Sarah reached out through the quantum consciousness network one final time, not to transcend physical existence, but to strengthen the connections between individual minds while preserving their unique perspectives. Instead of joining the predecessors' collective, she helped create something new, a network of enhanced consciousness that maintained individual identity while sharing knowledge and experience across species boundaries. The transformation that followed reshaped galactic civilization in ways that would take centuries to fully understand. Humans, Zephyrians, and dozens of other species found themselves connected through quantum consciousness links that transcended old boundaries of race, distance, and ideology. Wars became impossible when enemies could literally share each other's thoughts and motivations. Scientific progress accelerated exponentially as knowledge was shared instantly across the galaxy. Sarah remained at the center of it all, no longer quite human, but not fully transcendent either. She had become something unique in the galaxy's history, a bridge between individual consciousness and collective awareness, helping newly awakened species navigate the transition to enhanced existence while preserving the diversity of thought that made consciousness valuable. Years later, when historians tried to identify the moment when everything changed, they would point to a single engagement in the Epsilon Eridani system, where one human pilot eliminated 6 hostile fighters in 20 minutes. But those who understood the deeper currents of cosmic evolution knew that the real transformation had begun long before, in the dreams of beings who had imagined a galaxy where consciousness itself could evolve beyond the limitations of individual existence. The universe was vast, and consciousness was its most precious resource. Thanks to Sarah Chen and countless others like her, that resource would continue to grow and evolve for millions of years to come, guided by the understanding that true transcendence meant not the abandonment of individuality, but its preservation within something infinitely greater.